In this week's video, I'll be talking about this jar here, and I'm going to show you how I turned it into a planted pond jar. And the reason I'm calling it a pond jar is because the plants that come out of it will be primarily pond plants that will emerge from the water rather than be planted in the water. So this jar I got from TK Maxx. It's just a standard vase jar, but it is quite thick, so it's quite strong, and it's a really nice size as well. It's got a bit of a depth to it. It's just a really nice jar, and I had to buy it. Obviously I bought it for the purpose of making a miniature pond in it. I'm just going to show you how I did it and the process it took. It took me about 4 hours, which is quite a long time for what it is. So here's the substrate that I'm using. This substrate is meant to be good for growing plants. It's like a plant substrate. I was going to use soil and then standard substrate, but I thought it's going to be way too difficult because I'm going to try and build the back up, as you'll see. So I went with this substrate. It's good for growing plants and it's not going to fall apart and make your water cloudy. It's pretty much like standard substrate really. These are root tabs. They're quite cheap. I'm just going to bury some of these in the substrate just to provide some extra nutrients for the plants. A rock that I bought a few of these little pieces of rocks just to dot around the bottom to help the wood stand up inside the jar and hold back that substrate. These are the plants that I'm going to use. First I'll just show you the 4 pond plants that I'm going to put in there. I'll name them later, but also the names will be in the descriptions. But there's 4 different species in here, and because it's winter they're sort of dormant, so there's not a lot to them at the moment. These are some plants that I've already had on the left and the right. These are called Hygrophila, and they're just standard aquarium plants that I'm thinking about using. This is some bogwood that I have for the jar. I've got 3 pieces of this bogwood, and what I'm going to try and do is stack it up so that it keeps all the substrate at the back. So it's going to act like a wall halfway through the jar. So I'm going to have low gravel at the front and then very high gravel at the back, like nearly reaching the top of the jar. But the only thing really that I have to keep in mind is covering up the gaps in between the wood so that the substrate doesn't fall through. And this took me a very long time, and as you can see here, this is my second try now. I had about 4 goes at this using different ways, and this time I thought, why not add the substrate and hopefully I can get the wood and the rocks to sit in better. The rocks really are just to cover the gaps so that the substrate doesn't come through the gaps of the wood. The rocks just help it stay there. Again, didn't quite work, all the substrate kept pouring through, so I'm trying it again now, just moving the wood and the rocks around, just trying to create that wall without any gaps so that it can hold that substrate back. So this time goes right, and this is the one that I keep. The wood's quite a good piece of the wood actually. They're quite flat and they're quite long, and coupled with a few stones, a few larger rocks, I pretty much get all the gaps filled in. And as you can see here, it's holding up all the substrate at the back, and none of it's coming through, which is good, which is what I want. It looks pretty stable now, because what you really want is stability, because you don't want to put all your plants in and then find out later that it's all fell through. So it seems pretty stable at the moment. I found some bits of slate, some thin bits of slate, and I kind of just stick these in the gaps just to really ensure that none of that substrate falls through. Now that I've got the structure sorted, I'm going to start adding the plants, and adding the plants is really the part that I wanted to do the most. So here we've got hairgrass. I didn't realise this hairgrass isn't actually emergent at the moment. It's still in its submerged form, which means it doesn't look that great when it's sticking out the water, because eventually it will die off because the leaves need to be submerged. So what I'm hoping is that the leaves will die back and new emergent leaves will start to grow. And apparently they're meant to get quite tall as well, and like really grassy, so it should look quite good eventually. And the trick with these plants here, these grassy plants, is to split them up when you get them into smaller bunches and space them out a bit so they fill the area in much quicker. I'm just adding some water now, just so the plants don't dry out. This next plant is a reed plant. It's called the Norfolk Reed, and at the moment it doesn't look like much. It just looks like a couple of dead twigs, but it will start sprouting new reeds, and the reeds grow very tall. It's just like a common pond reed. This next plant's really good as well. It has a mix of like purple leaves and green leaves. It's called water celery. That's a common name anyway. It looks like it's going to do quite well because it's got quite a lot of roots. And this plant's going to grow quite big as well, because the idea of this pond jar is for the plants really just to take over. And considering that all the plants are pond plants, they should take over fairly quickly once they establish. So that should be fun to watch. I'll have to do a lot of trimming and cutting back as well, I think, which is always fun. It's fun to see them grow and change. It's quite hard to get these plants into this substrate securely, because the substrate's it's a bit bigger than I'm used to. I usually use like almost sand sort of sized substrate, and they just push in fairly easy, but these particles are a bit bigger, and it's hard to push them in and not just destroy the plant. Also, I'm trying not to push all the substrate past the barrier and into the bottom. The next plant, it seems like I forgot to show the camera what plant it was, but it's called a water mint or aquatic mint, and this grows pretty crazy as well apparently. And also if you brush it, you get the smell of mint, so that should be fun. So all 4 pond plants have been put in. Doesn't look like much again because they're in their dormant stage, but they should all blossom pretty quick. This is the Hygrophila that I had spare. It's a standard aquarium stem plant, but I'm hoping it takes to being out of the water and it will grow immersed, and if it does, it will start to look really good. and I've got quite a bit of it as well, so I'm just planting it all around the back into the empty spaces. So I'm just really packing the space with plants. So what you've got to imagine is long term on this jar, you probably won't see most of the jar, to be honest. Eventually I'm going to hang a nice big light over the top of this bench, which will be directly over this jar, so it's going to have a lot of light and the plants will bush out quite a bit. So at the moment it might not look like much with just these little bunch of plants at the back, but I'll definitely be doing an update video. It may be a month or 2 months time, depending on how much growth that you can actually see, just so that we can see which plants have took off, which plants have failed, if any, and which plants look the best, and to see if I've added any more plants or if I think I need to add any more plants, because I'm really not sure what to expect when this all grows out. I'm not really sure what it's going to end up like, but I'm hoping it's pretty crazy. So the jar's looking pretty nice at the moment. We've got all our plants in, it's looking quite green. But here is another plant, Christmas moss. It's a lot like Java moss, and I've only ever used Java moss before, but I thought I'd go for a slightly different type of moss. So I've got this Christmas moss here. It's attached to this little metal grid. I'm just going to take it off the grid and start planting it on the wood. I want to cover certain parts of the wood with the moss so that the moss attaches and you get that natural moss on wood look, and I really think this will add some depth and some natural detail to the pond jar. But I know that moss does take over and it might grow out of hand, so it might need quite a bit of regular trimming, otherwise it will just take over and it can look unsightly, but we'll see. So I've just used some standard cotton thread just to tie it on, but I realised there's only really one place that I can use this thread, and that's on this piece of wood here. I couldn't really tie this thread to any more piece of the wood, so I actually got out some super glue. See, I'm trying the cotton here, it's not really working because I can't really get round to the back of the wood, and once I fill this jar with water, the moss is just gonna float around. So I got the super glue to super glue the moss to the wood, because eventually the moss will grow over the super glue and you shouldn't see it. But what happened was the glue actually ran down the wood, which I didn't notice, and then when I added the water you could see all the white super glue that ran down the wood. It's not too much of a big deal. I'm hoping this just disappears over time, or the moss actually grows over the top of it. There's not much I can do. Jar's looking pretty good now with the water in, apart from the super glue obviously, but none of the substrate seems to be falling down and the plants don't seem to be going anywhere. They're pretty much all rooted into the substrate, so they should be set now to grow. Just going to empty the water a couple of times and refill, just to get rid of some of the cloudiness. So now the water is pretty crystal clear and we can see inside. Just added little bits of moss around the wood just pushing it into any crevices that I can see, and this should spread then throughout the wood, and I'm hoping some of the moss actually grows out of the water. So it will start in the water and it will creep up the wood and out of the water, which will look really nice, which I'm pretty sure it will do, because the wood actually wicks the water up the wood, so the moss will always stay moist and it won't dry out. So this is where the jar will be going, on my little bench, my bench built specifically for plants. I'm just going to add one final touch to this jar. I'm going to add some S. repens, the plant that I've previously mentioned that is a very good carpeting plant, a low maintenance, low tech carpeting plant, and I've got quite a lot of it from my other tank, so I've cut some pieces off. I'm just going to plant them in here, and maybe we'll end up with a carpet just on the bottom of the jar. I think that'll look really good, and it'll be a really nice effect, because with all the plants growing out the top, I don't want the bottom of the jar to look bare and empty, so why not add plants to that as well. So this is my little pond jar. It's quite easy to make, anybody can make it. Let me know in the comments below if you like the jar and if you plan on making one yourself. Any questions, as always, just let me know, ask me in the comments and I'll be sure to answer you. All the details on the plants etc will be in the description, or the scientific names that I can't pronounce. So thanks for watching, and if you want to see the future update video then please subscribe.